In May 2021, the reigning US Open and Australian Open champion, a woman ranked among the very best tennis players alive, stood in a press room in Paris, read a short statement out loud, and then walked away from the tournament entirely. She hadn't lost. She wasn't injured. She just left. For weeks afterward, almost nobody outside her closest circle understood why. What she said in that room would end up changing the entire conversation around elite sport. But the real story actually starts 3 years earlier, in New York, on a night she should have been the happiest she had ever been. Here is what most fans do not realize. The woman who walked away from Roland Garros in 2021 is the same woman who, less than 2 months later, would be handed one of the single greatest honors in world sport. And almost nobody expected her to accept it, let alone deliver. Stay with me, because the gap between those two moments is where this entire story lives. Her name is Naomi Osaka. Born in Japan, raised mostly in the United States, she exploded onto the tennis world in September 2018 by beating her childhood idol, Serena Williams, in the US Open final. A match remembered less for Osaka's tennis and more for the chaos around Serena's code violations, an emotional trophy ceremony, and boos raining down on a 20-year-old who had just achieved her lifelong dream and ended up in tears instead of celebrating. From there, Osaka kept winning the Australian Open in 2019, which made her the first Asian player ever ranked world number 1. Then, at the pandemic-delayed 2020 US Open, she walked out for 7 matches, wearing 7 different masks, each bearing the name of a different black victim of racial violence, turning her own platform into something bigger than a tournament and winning the title anyway. A few months later, in early 2021, she added a 4th Grand Slam at the Australian Open, 4 majors by age 23. On paper, she was the most dominant player of her generation. But here is the part almost no one saw coming, and it is the part that finally explains where this story started. That May, at Roland Garros, Osaka announced she would not be doing any press conferences during the tournament to protect her mental health. The tournament fined her $15,000 for skipping media duties after her first-round win and threatened her with default and suspension if she kept refusing. So, she withdrew from the entire tournament, and this time, she told the world why. Quote, "I would never trivialize mental health or use the term lightly," she said. "The truth is that I have suffered long bouts of depression since the US Open in 2018, and I have had a really hard time coping with that." End quote. Remember that date, 2018, because that means the smiling 20-year-old on that podium, the one everyone assumed was living the dream, had actually been quietly struggling since the very night she became famous. She skipped Wimbledon too. For a while, nobody knew if she would come back to tennis at all. If you are hearing her story for the first time, hitting subscribe helps me keep telling stories like this one, the real ones behind the trophies, not just the highlight reels. Then came the twist nobody predicted. Just weeks after withdrawing from a Grand Slam to protect her own mental health, Naomi Osaka was chosen to light the Olympic cauldron at the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Games, in front of the entire planet, arguably the single biggest individual honor in world sport, and it landed on the one athlete who had just told everyone she was barely holding it together. She lost in the 3rd round days later. It was not the fairy tale comeback people wanted. But it was not over either, because a few weeks after that, at a tournament in Cincinnati, the crowd turned on her over a code violation. She broke down crying in her on-court interview and admitted publicly that winning did not even feel like relief to her anymore. Only losing felt heavy. Then, at the US Open that same month, she lost early to a rising young player named Leylah Fernandez, cried again in the press conference, and told reporters she genuinely did not know when, or if, she would play again. For the second time in a few months, one of the most talented athletes on the planet walked away from the game at the peak of her ability. Almost everyone assumed that was the end of the story. It was not. In January 2023, Osaka announced she was pregnant with rapper Cordai and stepped away from tennis completely. Her daughter, Shai, was born that July. Here is where most tragic athlete stories would just end. Injury, burnout, retirement, a sad footnote. Osaka's did not. She came back in 2024, and the climb was slow and, by her own admission, humbling. A player who had once been ranked #1, grinding through smaller tournaments, rebuilding her, ranking almost from scratch. Early in 2025, she reached her first final since her return. In Auckland, she picked up a title on the WTA 125 Tour in San Malo. She broke through at Wimbledon. She made her 6th career WTA 1000 final in Montreal and reached the semi-finals of the US Open, pushing her back into the world's top 20 for the first time since January 2022. She has not slowed down. Just days ago, on July 31st, she fought back from a set-down to survive a scare against Elisabetta Cocciaretto and reach the semi-finals of the DC Open. Today, she walks into the National Bank Open in Toronto as last year's runner-up, defending a mountain of ranking points, currently sitting at number 13 in the world. So here is the real story hiding underneath that press conference in Paris back in 2021. It was never really about tennis. The $20, third-year-old, crying in 2018, was already struggling in silence. The world #1 lighting an Olympic flame in 2021 was doing it while barely keeping herself together. And the woman fighting through 3-set battles right now, in the summer of 2026, is not chasing the same career she had before. She is building an entirely different one, on her own terms, as a mother, on her own timeline, refusing to pretend the hard years did not happen. That is the actual comeback, not the ranking, the honesty. If this is the first time you have heard the full story, tell me in the comments which moment surprised you the most, and subscribe, because there is another athlete's real story coming next, and you do not want to miss it.